Everything is expensive nowadays. I mean, everything. We now expect to buy a bag of chips with the side of extra gas. Speaking of gas, the prices are up again. And is anyone shocked by this?
Within hours of the first strike in Iran. This is ridiculous.
Even egg price spikes are triggering another investigation for possible price gouging. Corporate greed, or at least that's what we're calling it. And yeah, sometimes there's some truth to that. There were massive rounds of layoffs due to AI, and then months later, it backfired, and companies are desperately trying to hire people back. Laid off employees were rehired by their former employees. I hope they got a bonus. A huge one. Why does the system allowing this short-term kind of thinking to happen over and over again? I don't think greed explains the full picture here. I think people, and companies for that matter, are being trained to think more short-term. So today, I'm going to break this down, the cognitive mechanisms behind short-sightedness, and how uncertainty really makes it feel more rational. As a scientist, I've learned to see the world through data. And it's really exciting to me to see the hidden things and hidden facts that are coming to light underneath the beautiful charts. One thing I've come to appreciate more and more now is how money influences our behavior, how we learn, how we make decisions, how different types of characters are actually playing a role within this social structure. And as a neuroscientist, I explain it in the best way I know how, through how the brain works. And if we can understand each other, we'll get to a point where we can achieve global peace, finally, right? The Washington State House just passed the so-called millionaire's tax.
6346, as amended by the House, is declared passed.
If you make more than $1 million, congratulations. You're now going to pay a 9.9% tax on your income above that million. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a billionaire and former Starbucks CEO reportedly just moved out of Seattle after 47 years. Can you blame him? I mean, he's allowed to live wherever he wants, right? He moved to Miami, by the way, where it's known to be a tax haven. But people are still blaming corporations for their insatiable desire to make profits off of people like us. And it's easy to see why. What little wage growth that we've seen, or we might have seen over the years, after adjusting for inflation, looks pretty stagnant. But stagnant wages aren't for the few lucky ones. CEO compensation has been out of control for the past decades. Are their special skills really all that special that they deserve to make 280 times more than a typical worker? Or in some comparisons, 7.5 times more than even the country's top 0.1% of earners.
We are asking the 21,000 wealthiest Washingtonians, that's 0.25% of Washingtonians.
Then there's this image of this greedy or even sadistic CEO that is portrayed as a monster. The person who commits crimes and misconduct of all kinds. It leaves a bad taste in our mouths. And it makes us think that they're all like that. As if we're dealing with some evil narcissist with the disdainful look on their face. Like, we are a number, we are just a decimal point in their earnings report, means to an end, whatever you want to call it. But really, there are even studies connecting narcissism to CEO as a personality trait. And CEOs, yeah, they love to get admiration, the attention from the media, right? And to be fair, I think everyone has some level of narcissism in them. Just look at me. I have a YouTube channel. I create content and I tell people to watch me. I mean, how narcissistic of me to say that to think that I have something useful, say, for you to take the time to watch me. But nonetheless, narcissistic CEOs ironically can be very effective and charismatic CEOs and leaders, at least on paper. They tend to invest more heavily in R&D, and they tend to move more proactively on tech innovation, which ultimately leads them to have a favorable earnings report. So personality does matter, but it still doesn't explain the full mechanism. Why is leadership in companies or countries for that matter, so short-sighted. There are studies showing that short-sighted decision-making is positively correlated with damage in the ventral medial frontal lobe, which helps us encode the value of things. And abnormal decision-making has been even pointed out as a fall risk in older people. And we're seeing a tanking economy as we speak, literally a fall risk. But we also have something called delay discounting. Delay discounting is when the longer you have to wait, the less valuable the reward feels. Do I want to eat pizza or salads? Do I want to take the elevator or just walk the stairs? Buy now, pay later, right? These are the kinds of choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. Smaller rewards sooner, the immediate gratification, versus the larger rewards later for a long-term payoff. You may have heard the Stanford Marshmallow study from the 1970s. In the original version of the study, kids were given one marshmallow. They could either eat it now or wait 15 minutes to get a second one. The kids who waited turned out to do better in life, more successful academically, career-wise, and even they were healthier. A 2025 study by Gouging and colleagues found that self-control is correlated with stronger functional connectivity between dorsolateral and medial prefrontal cortex. Again, this is important for value coding. But contrary to popular belief, delayed discounting is not about self-control or even willpower. This is the other side of the marshmallow story that you might not have heard about. Later studies found that delaying gratification has less to do with patience than people think. Sometimes people like to intentionally choose smaller rewards sooner because they don't trust the future to deliver a bigger payoff. For example, one study found that if children didn't trust the experimenter to keep their promise, like if they saw experimenter lying before the marshmallow test, their average rating time dropped from 12 minutes to 3 minutes. And I wouldn't say that's childish impatience because that's a rational being thinking ahead about a potentially unreliable environment. Scientists always come up with this most oxymoron things that could possibly describe a thing like this. And they call this behavior far-sighted impulsivity. The current economic and political climate feels a little too uncertain for my liking. And people wonder why Gen Z is delaying having kids, getting married, and other major life milestones. And not that they have to, by the way. They're not even in their 30s. And of course, they have the option to not have a child. Why are people talking about this in the first place? Household income matters a lot too. Kids from more affluent families crush the marshmallow test. They all have this great discipline and willpower, right? Possibly because they've seen plenty of marshmallows around in the house growing up. And similarly, delayed discounting tends to be steeper in people living in poverty. Nowadays, becoming a homeowner or becoming a millionaire feels so out of reach for a lot of people. So yeah, people treat yourself, you know? The millennials, go treat yourself. Buy that avocado toast and, spend $9 on the Starbucks lattes. But that doesn't automatically make them reckless or financially irresponsible because it could actually be considered a rational behavior in the face of uncertainty. Now, let's apply the same concept back to the CEOs. CEOs operate on very short timescales. In many cases, all they have really is 3 to 5 years to prove their worth to the company. One study that looked at more than 4,800 CEOs at US public companies, only 4% of women CEOs, by the way, which is a whole nother issue that I don't have time to go into, but nonetheless, their average tenure was just about 7.6 years. And they typically started around age 52 and stayed till 59. And if you remember, this oddly overlaps with the U-shaped happiness curve that I talked about in my previous video. And so think about this. You step into a very public, very stressful position at a time in your life where your happiness level is at the lowest. Then you have to spend months and years, if you're lucky to be keeping that job for that long, trying to appease shareholders breathing down your neck about the next quarterly report, right? I mean, would you be thinking decades or in terms of years if you could actually get cut, if you could get fired the next quarter? So it's not always a literal monster being at the top. The current reward system, the reward structure, pushes leaders toward more short-term gains over long-term strategy. And, with the time pressure, you're even more incentivized to think short-term. Make the company dollars so that you can keep the top dollar yourself. Then there's another biological driver, dopamine. I've said this before, dopamine is not a pleasure signal. It's actually a teaching signal. Dopamine helps us to learn which actions led to better than expected outcomes. In that sense, drug addiction is actually a form of maladaptive learning. Now, when it comes to risk and uncertainty, the reward signal can get even stronger. It makes it all the more exciting and rewarding for the brain to keep going for the riskier gamble. And this lines up well with the fact that CEOs actually tend to have a higher risk appetite. That's partly what gets them into that stressful job in the first place. Studies have shown that risky wins can teach the brain that bigger swings are bigger payoffs. And dopamine responses are also stronger to cues that predict riskier gambles. But human desire is so hard to satisfy. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. We always want more. And dopamine is partially to blame. Over time, we need a better outcome to get the same dopamine boost. If you get let's say you got a surprise $10,000 bonus the first time, you feel amazing. But the next time it happens, the same bonus doesn't hit it the same way. So you need a bigger number, say 25 grand this time, to feel the same sort of increase in the dopamine. And that may be part of the neurological basis for the endless desire that we have as humans and not appreciating what we already have. The scientist who discovered dopamine reward prediction error even argues that dopamine is there to teach us how to maximize our gains. And that is a big part of capitalism and consumerism nowadays. And he even suggests that sometimes big losses like economic decline and war, basically what we already have right now, are exactly what we need to reset the cycle toward more modest, wiser beings. Let me know what you think of that. I'm curious about what you think about that. So what do you do? Well, if you're in a position of power, think about long-term metrics and really listen to the people who are telling you. People are really struggling, and uncertainty really pushes them to discount the reward even more steeply. So think about that. And dangling little carrots while moving the goalposts around really doesn't help with the retention of your employees. So think about the long-term effects of what you're trying to do today. Earn their trust, and they'll actually do their best work for delayed gratification. If you're a worker, remember the CEO is also a human and someone who's very much likely to be under immense stress and pressure. So have some empathy towards that. It is really important to use our anger in a productive way. Be angry at the incentives, the social structures that make this possible, rather than some just generic villains that we see in a hero's journey. There are plenty of systems and structures that need updating. So focus on that. Use the anger in a productive way to fix those systems rather than be upset and blame those generic characters, and support the companies that are doing right by their employees, treating their employees well, and not companies that are running their business in a knee-jerk reaction manner, only reacting to the headlines and news and actually thinking long term.